The wind howled through the city streets, carrying a chill that pierced through even the thickest coats. Neon reflections danced in the puddles left by a sudden spring rain, casting an eerie glow over the near-empty sidewalk. Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO of the Carter tech empire, pulled the collar of his tailored overcoat higher and glanced at his watch. 2:07 a.m. He wasn't supposed to be here. A board meeting had run late, and a faulty car service had left him, stranded 3 blocks from his penthouse. But none of that explained why he took the long way home. Maybe it was the unease he couldn't shake these past few days. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe, deep down, he had always hoped to see her again, even after all this time. That's when he saw them. A woman sat quietly on a rusted metal bench outside an all-night pharmacy. Her shoulders hunched, holding a small, sleeping child wrapped tightly in a faded purple blanket. Her head was bowed, but something in her posture pulled at his memory. A posture he hadn't seen in over a year. And when she looked up, his breath caught. Rachel, the woman who had disappeared without goodbye. Without closure, without a trace. She was thinner now, paler. Her hair, once smooth and curled, was damp and frizzy from the rain, tied in a lazy bun. Her eyes, which once sparkled with endless ideas and clever comebacks, now looked tired, haunted, even, but it was her, and in her arms, a child who looked impossibly like someone he once knew intimately. Like him. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, as the sounds of distant sirens and humming streetlights filled the silence between them. Then finally, Rachel. She looked up again, this time straight at him, and her eyes didn't flinch. Ethan, she said quietly. The way she said his name, it wasn't cold, it wasn't warm either. It was heavy, like a name she'd buried and now had to unearth. In the middle of a storm, what are you doing out here? He asked, stepping closer, unable to take his eyes off the child. It's the middle of the night. Where's your car? Your husband? Rachel gave a faint, humorless smile. Funny, you ask now. He ignored the sting in her words and looked down at the sleeping child, whose curly hair peeked from beneath the blanket. Who is she? He asked, voice shaky. Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she gently rocked the child and whispered, Go. Back to your world, Ethan, the one where things are neat and predictable. This isn't your problem. I didn't ask if it was my problem, he said, more firmly now. I asked who she is. Rachel stood up slowly. The baby stirred but didn't wake. You left, she said flatly. I was ready to take on the world with you, and you left when it mattered most. I was overwhelmed, Rachel. Everything was collapsing, my company, my reputation, the press was tearing us apart, and I was pregnant, she said, not raising her voice but raising the weight of her truth. Do you know what it feels like to carry a child while pretending you're not breaking? To be sick in the mornings and scared every night while praying someone might come back? He was silent. I wrote you a letter. I came to your office. I stood outside the security gate with my heart in my hands. But you were already in meetings, already too busy. So I walked away. The weight in Ethan's chest grew heavier. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't want to know. Rachel adjusted the blanket around the baby as the sky began to lighten, hints of dawn stretching across the wet pavement. Her name is Aria, she said after a long pause. Ethan's throat tightened. How old is she? 11 months. His heart dropped. The timeline matched, almost too perfectly. 1,000 things swirled in his mind. Questions, regrets, excuses, but none of them felt useful. All he could do was stare at the little girl who had his exact dimples. Suddenly, footsteps approached. A tall woman in a beige coat came hurrying across the street, holding a small umbrella and looking panicked. Rachel? She called. Rachel turned to her. I'm sorry, Mia, we had to stop. Aria needed rest. Mia's eyes shifted quickly to Ethan. Is this Ethan? Rachel replied. Aria's biological father. The world stopped spinning for a second. Mia blinked, then nodded slowly. I'll take Aria. You two need to talk. Rachel hesitated, then handed the sleeping child to Mia, her fingers lingering for just a second too long. When she turned back to Ethan, her face had changed. Softer, maybe. Or maybe she was just too tired to guard herself anymore. I'm not here to start anything, Ethan said. But I can't walk away now. I need to understand. I want to know her. Rachel's eyes welled for the first time that night. It's not that simple, she whispered. I'm not asking for simple, he said. I'm asking for a chance. She didn't respond right away. She looked out at the city, waking up around them, cars beginning to hum, the scent of coffee drifting from a nearby bakery, and birds daring to sing despite the stormy night that had passed. Then finally, she said, we'll talk, but not here, not like this. And with that, she turned to follow Mia and the child into the quiet of the dawn. Ethan stood still, watching them disappear around the corner. And for the first time in his life, the man who had built skyscrapers and bought empires felt completely small, but maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, if you could call it sitting. He kept pacing the floor, fingers twitching, unable to focus on the mountain of contracts laid out across his sleek glass desk. The city skyline, once a symbol of his dominance, now looked distant and blurry behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every now and then, he'd glance at his phone. No new messages. It was absurd. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking was now waiting anxiously, helplessly for a text. One message, one sign from Rachel. Her words from the night before echoed like a haunting lullaby. In his mind, we'll talk, but not here, not like this. He didn't sleep, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Arya's face, the soft curls, the tiny hand wrapped around her blanket hand, those eyes, his eyes. A quiet knock at the door startled him. Not his assistant. It was Hannah, the company's in-house therapist. She'd been hired after a mental health initiative he pushed through the year prior. Everything okay, Ethan? She asked gently, stepping inside. You missed your wellness check this morning. He forced a half smile. I'm fine. Just not myself today. She hesitated, then walked closer. You've been pacing for over an hour. Want to talk off the record? He considered brushing her off. But instead, he sighed and said, have you ever learned something that changed your entire foundation? In just 5 minutes. Hannah's brows knit slightly. Plenty of times. But I'm guessing this isn't about the company. Ethan shook his head. It's personal. Deeply personal. And I can't fix it with a business proposal. She nodded. Sometimes the most important things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be faced. After she left, he sat back down. The silence now seemed deafening. An alert pinged on his screen. A message from an unknown number. If you're serious about knowing Arya, meet me at Riverwalk Park. 2 p.m. Don't be late. No name, but he didn't need one. At exactly 1:45. Ethan was already at Riverwalk Park, standing awkwardly near the edge of the playground, surrounded by toddlers chasing pigeons and parents sipping coffee. For the first time in years, he was out of place. And then he saw her. Rachel was pushing a stroller, slow and cautious. Arya was awake this time, her curious eyes scanning everything: the ducks, the leaves, the sky. Rachel stopped a few feet from him. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Just a calm, unreadable expression. You came, she said simply. I meant what I said, Ethan replied. I want to know her. Rachel reached down and gently picked up Arya, holding her carefully. She doesn't know who you are, she said softly. To her, you're just a stranger. I understand. No, I don't think you do, she continued. This isn't a movie where the father suddenly shows up and everything magically falls into place. This is real, messy, confusing, and she already calls someone else dad. That stopped him cold. Daniel, he asked. Rachel nodded. He's been in her life since day one. He stayed when you didn't. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't know. If I had, but you didn't, she said quickly. And now, we have to walk a very delicate line. He looked down at Arya. She was playing with a small red toy in her hand, completely unaware of the tidal waves surrounding her tiny life. I'm not here to take her away, Ethan said, voice low. I'm here because I missed the beginning, and I don't want to miss the rest. Rachel's gaze softened for a moment. We had something once, before everything fell apart. But this isn't about us anymore. I know, he replied. This is about doing what's right. For her, she nodded slowly. Then start small. No big gestures, no press releases. Just moments. Rachel reached into the stroller bag and handed him a small bottle of baby bubbles. She loves chasing bubbles. Let's see if she likes chasing yours. It was the smallest gesture, but to Ethan, it felt like the start of a marathon. He knelt down on the grass, took the bottle, and gently blew a stream of shimmering bubbles into the air. Arya's eyes widened. She giggled, not just a polite laugh, but a deep, unfiltered burst of joy. She reached out, tiny hands flailing at the floating bubbles. Rachel stood a few feet back, arms crossed, watching them. Something in her posture had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall she'd built. For 15 minutes, Ethan blew bubbles. And Arya laughed. When she finally tired, Rachel scooped her up and said, That's enough for today. Ethan stood up, unsure what to say. She liked you, Rachel said quietly. That's a start. He nodded. Thank you. As she turned to leave, Ethan called out, Rachel. She paused. I don't want to disrupt her life, but I do. Want to earn my way into it? Rachel didn't answer. She just nodded once and walked away, carrying Arya in her arms. Ethan stood still, the empty bubble wand in hand, and for the first time in years, felt like he'd done something truly meaningful. Boardroom, no spotlight, no cameras, just a few bubbles, and a little girl who had no idea how much she'd just changed his life. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. Ethan never realized how long days could feel until he began counting them by moments he wasn't allowed to have. After that meeting in the park, time moved differently. Each morning, he woke hoping for a message from Rachel. Most days there was none, and yet he didn't stop waiting. He hadn't told anyone at work, not his board members, not his assistant, not even his brother, who normally heard about every twist in Ethan's life within hours. This wasn't a business transaction. This was something sacred and fragile, like trying to hold sunlight in your hands without crushing it. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed. Rachel, Arya has a music group class every Friday. It's small. Parents can sit in the back. No promises. But if you want to see more of her, be there at 10. No signature. No emojis, but it was something. The next morning, Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, standing awkwardly at the back of a brightly colored room in a community center. He was overdressed in a blazer and slacks, surrounded by yoga pants and diaper bags. A few parents gave him curious glances. One mother leaned toward another and whispered something. Ethan didn't mind. His eyes were fixed on the tiny figure. Near the circle of foam mats, Arya. Sat cross-legged, holding a small tambourine in her lap. Fascinated by the teacher in the center of the group shaking maracas and singing, Rachel was seated a few feet away, quietly observing. She gave Ethan a glance neutral, but not uncondemned, looked back to Arya. As music filled the room, Ethan watched his daughter light up. Her joy wasn't loud. It was curious, focused. She mimicked the sounds, tapped her hands in rhythm, tilted her head when the teacher sang off-key. She had his eyes, but her spirit, something about her spark reminded him of Rachel. Brave, intentional, unapologetically real. The session ended with the kids gathering their tiny instruments into baskets and getting stamps on their hands. Rachel stood, ready to leave, but Ethan gently stepped forward. Coffee? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. They walked across the street to a small cafe. Nothing fancy, chalkboard menu, mismatched chairs, the scent of cinnamon in the air. Rachel ordered chamomile tea. Ethan just got water. He didn't trust his hands not to shake. She was so focused, he said softly. She really listens. She's like that. She absorbs everything, Rachel replied, blowing gently on her tea. You used to be like that too, remember, listening more than talking. I stopped, didn't I? She shrugged. You got busy. You had an empire to build. He was quiet for a while. I regret how I handled everything. I thought stepping away was the right move at the time. I didn't want to drag you into my chaos. Rachel looked him in the eye. You didn't drag me. You left me. There's a difference. He flinched. Truth wasn't always subtle, but he didn't argue. I'm not trying to rewrite history, he said, but I'd like to be part of her present, her future. Rachel stirred her tea in slow circles. Daniel, he's been her father in every way that matters. Diapers, midnight fevers, first steps. He's earned her trust, her love. I'm not here to take his place, Ethan said carefully. I just want to find my place. Rachel didn't reply for a while. Outside the window, a boy ran past with a balloon, laughing wildly. She already has a rhythm, Rachel finally said. Her world has its shape. Adding you into that, it's not just about you and her. It's about all of us. Me, Daniel. And how we explain this to a child who's too young to understand betrayal, but old enough to feel confusion. I'll follow your lead, Ethan said. Whatever boundaries you set, I'll honor them. She blinked, as if surprised. Most men wouldn't say that, she said. Most men haven't lost you, he replied gently. The moment hung there quiet, filled with too many unspoken things. Then Rachel stood up. I have to get her home. Nap time's sacred. Ethan nodded and walked with her to the door. At the curb, she paused. Next Friday. Same time, you can come again. Just sit in the back. I will, he said quickly. As she strapped Arya into her car seat, the little girl looked up at him eyes-wide, unafraid. She reached out and touched his tie. Just a small hand, a quick grab. Nice color, Rachel said, smirking a little. She has taste. Ethan laughed, something loosening in his chest. As the car drove off, he stayed on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the taillights disappear. Something had changed. Not everything. Not yet, but enough. Enough to hope again. Asterisk. The knock at Rachel's door came at exactly 6 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone, not tonight. Arya had just fallen asleep after a mild tantrum over her missing sock puppet, and Rachel was hoping for 20 minutes of quiet before cleaning the kitchen. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there with a small cardboard box in his hands, and a nervous smile that didn't reach his eyes. I brought something, he said, lifting the box slightly. No pressure, just something for Arya. Rachel's first instinct was to shut the door gently and tell him this wasn't the time, but something about his face made her pause. Not desperation, not charm, just a quiet kind of longing. She stepped aside. Inside, the house was warm and lived in. There were toy blocks scattered near the couch, a basket of unfolded laundry in the corner, and the faint smell of apple slices and baby lotion in the air. The version of Rachel who once walked red carpets with Ethan in designer gowns might have cringed at the clutter, but this Rachel, this version knew. These were the signs of a real life. Ethan looked around quietly. Respectfully, Rachel gestured. To the couch? What's in the box? He sat carefully and opened it, revealing a handmade photo album. Each page had a photo printed on matte paper, captioned in Ethan's handwriting. Some were from the few visits he'd had with Arya so far. Her chasing bubbles, reaching for a crayon, laughing mid-clap. Others were from before. Old photos from his and Rachel's past, carefully selected to tell a story. I thought if someday she asks who I was, there should be something to explain it. Not from the press, not from assumptions, just something from me. For her, Rachel sat slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. She didn't touch the book, not yet. That's not something a lot of men would think to do. I've had time to think, he replied softly, and more time to realize how little I knew about what truly matters. The house was quiet. A white noise machine buzzed faintly from Arya's room. For a moment, they both sat in the stillness. Daniel's away tonight? Rachel said suddenly. Business trip. He's back tomorrow. Ethan nodded, unsure what that meant. Rachel continued. Arya's been asking for more bubbles. He smiled slightly. I can bring more. You could just blow some tonight. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Rachel stood and walked to a small cabinet near the kitchen. She pulled out a half-used bottle of bubble solution and handed it to him. Then she quietly walked to Arya's room. A few moments later, she returned, carrying the sleepy-eyed toddler who clung to her shoulder. She might fall back asleep, but maybe you could try. Ethan stood, carefully taking the bottle. He crouched and began gently blowing bubbles. Soft, slow dot at first. Arya only blinked. Then one bubble landed on her foot and popped with a tiny sparkle. Her eyes lit up. She giggled. Rachel lowered her to the carpet. Arya toddled forward, chasing the next bubble with tiny wobbly steps, laughing every time one popped in front of her. Ethan knelt low, blowing bubble after bubble. The room filled with her giggles, floating laughter that seemed to bounce off the walls and settle into something deeper. Rachel leaned against the wall, watching. There was something unreal about it. The man who had once broken her heart, now blowing bubbles to the daughter he hadn't known existed a year ago, and doing it like he'd been there all along. After 20 minutes, Arya grew tired again. She crawled into Rachel's lap with a yawn and closed her eyes. Ethan watched in silence, unable to explain the swelling in his chest. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was something raw, rare. She knows you now, Rachel whispered. Not all the way, but enough to remember your face, your voice. I don't want to be a visitor, he said quietly. I want to be someone who matters in her world, but only if it doesn't tear hers apart. Rachel looked down at Arya. You don't know how complicated that will get. I don't, he admitted, but I want to try. Not for me. For her. Rachel stood and carried Arya back to her room. When she returned, her eyes were glassy. She calls Daniel Daddy. She's learning words fast. If this continues, we're going to have to decide how to explain who you are. I'll say I'm someone who loves her, he said gently. That's all I need to start with. Rachel didn't reply. She sat down again, this time closer. I thought I buried everything I felt for you, she said. But seeing you like this, it doesn't change what happened, but it changes how I see who you are now. He met her eyes. I don't expect anything more than your honesty. I don't know where this leads, she whispered. Neither do I, he said, but I'll walk carefully, and I'll never walk away again. She held his gaze, long and quiet. Then finally, she said, she has dance class next Tuesday. You should come. He nodded as he stood to leave. Rachel picked up the photo album and held it to her chest. Thank you for this, she said. He paused at the door. She's already changed my life, and she doesn't even know it yet. Outside, the night air was cool, clear as Ethan walked to his car. He realized something had shifted not just in the room, but in the direction of everything. They weren't just coexisting anymore. They were building something slowly, carefully, but real. And for the first time in years, he felt like he had a future that wasn't measured by profits or headlines, but by giggles and bubbles and tiny hands reaching for his. Asterisk, the music in the dance studio was soft, playful tiny piano notes bouncing like butterflies as toddlers moved clumsily across the wooden floor. A wall of mirrors reflected their attempts to spin, hop, and stretch, while parents lined the back with phones in hand, some recording, some cheering, others just exhausted. Ethan didn't film. He couldn't. He was too focused on her. Arya, in a tiny lavender tutu, was trying to imitate the instructor's movements. Her arms flapped more like bird wings than ballet poses, but her face was full of joy and fierce concentration. She wobbled, fell, then giggled, then got back up with the kind of determination that made Ethan's chest tighten. He hadn't taught her that. He hadn't been there to teach her anything. But watching her now, it didn't matter. She was brilliant and brave all on her own. Rachel sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't guarded either. Her silence was calmer now, more thoughtful than cautious. It was the kind of silence that didn't push people away, but held space for something still unfolding. First dance class, she screamed for 15 minutes, she said softly. Daniel had to sit on the floor with her the entire time. Ethan looked over, surprised by the openness. And now look at her, Rachel added, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly, twisting herself into a spaghetti noodle. He smiled. She's incredible. She's a hurricane in a tutu, Rachel said with a quiet laugh. And I love her for it. When the class ended, and the children scattered toward their parents, Arya ran straight to Rachel and threw herself into her arms. After a tight hug, she turned to Ethan. She didn't hesitate anymore. Ethan crouched. Hi, Arya. She reached out and tugged gently at his tie. Bubba. It took him a second before realizing bubbles. Rachel laughed. She remembers. I'll keep some in my jacket from now on, he said, pulling out a small bottle and handing it to her. Rain or shine. Back at Rachel's house, they had tea while Arya napped. It was starting to feel natural, this routine of small conversations and soft moments. But then, the front door opened. Daniel. He stepped inside, paused when he saw Ethan, and closed the door more firmly than necessary. Rachel stood, smoothing her hands against her jeans. "Hey, you're back early." Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on Ethan, not angry, exactly, but assessing. "Guarded. I caught an earlier flight," Daniel said. "Didn't realize we had company." "I invited him," Rachel replied, calm but firm. "He came to see Arya's dance class." Daniel nodded slowly, then turned to Ethan. "Can we talk?" Rachel looked between them, unsure, but finally said, "I'll check on Arya." The two men stood in the living room, the space between them thick with unspoken weight. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Ethan said before Daniel could speak. "I'm not here to take anyone's place, least of all yours." Daniel folded his arms. "Then why are you here?" "Because I missed the beginning," Ethan replied, "but I'm not missing the rest." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You weren't there when she took her first breath? When she couldn't sleep for nights? When Rachel was too tired to speak?" "I was." "I know. You disappeared." "I didn't know," Ethan said. "I failed Rachel, and I will regret that the rest of my life. But now that I know, I'm trying to do what's right for Arya. For all of us." Daniel studied him in silence. Finally, he said, "Arya calls me Dad. That's not a title, it's a responsibility. One I don't take lightly. And I'm not going to let anything confuse her or hurt Rachel." Ethan nodded. "I respect that. I'm not asking her to call me anything. I just want to earn a place. Whatever that looks like." Daniel exhaled, long and slow. "We're going to have to figure this out like adults, not rivals, not strangers." "I agree." Rachel returned then, holding Arya in her arms. The little girl was sleepy-eyed, thumb in her mouth, head nestled into her mother's shoulder. "She wanted to see both of you," Rachel said, glancing between the two men. "So, now's your chance to prove that this doesn't have to be complicated." Ethan looked at Daniel, then at Arya. "I'll go," he said gently. "It's late. I'll come back when she's awake and rested." Rachel touched his arm. "Wait." She handed Arya to him. Just like that, Ethan stood still, holding his daughter in his arms for the first time, fully aware, fully present. She blinked up at him, sleepy and content. He looked at Rachel, unsure. "She needs to know you're safe," Rachel said. "Not perfect, not heroic, just safe." Daniel didn't object. He only watched, tense but thoughtful. Ethan whispered to Arya, "Hi, sweetheart, I'm here." Her thumb popped out of her mouth just long enough for her to whisper, then fall asleep on his shoulder, and right there, in a room where the past, present, and future sat together under one roof, something shifted. They weren't just three adults navigating pain, they were becoming three adults, learning how to love one child together, not easily, not instantly, but willingly. The room was still, the kind of stillness that only came after emotions had moved through like a storm. Ethan stood beside Arya's crib, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. The soft hum of the nightlight buzzed in the corner, casting a warm glow over the room. She had fallen asleep on his shoulder earlier, and Rachel had let him stay longer than usual, longer than he expected. She was asleep now, clutching a small, plush elephant. Ethan reached down and gently adjusted the blanket around her. As he looked at her peaceful face, he realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. He loved her more than he knew how to explain, not as an idea or a responsibility, but as a living, breathing part of himself. Behind him, Rachel stood in the doorway, her arms crossed lightly. She didn't speak at first, letting the moment stretch. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "She sleeps better when you're around." He turned to face her, surprised. "I've noticed it," Rachel continued. "She naps deeper, wakes up less fussy." Ethan took a step toward her. "Maybe she's starting to recognize me." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." They moved to the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones so as not to disturb Arya. The air between them was different now, not charged, not cold, just calm, earnest. Like two people who'd walked through a fire and emerged, not untouched, but understanding. "I want to be part of her life officially," Ethan said. "Not just visits or bubbles in the park. I want to share the responsibility. Whatever that means legally or emotionally, I'm ready." Rachel looked up from her tea, her expression unreadable. "I need to know," she said slowly, "that this isn't just guilt talking, or curiosity, or something you'll outgrow when your world gets too crowded again." "It's not," he said, meeting her eyes. "This isn't a chapter I want to read. It's a life I want to build." Rachel's fingers tightened around her mug. "Daniel and I have had long talks about this. It's not easy, explaining to a child that she has two men who love her like a father." "I don't want to take Daniel's place," Ethan said again. "I want to find my own space, whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment. "There's one thing you need to understand before anything moves forward. Anything. You can't pick and choose moments. This isn't just the first recitals or birthdays. It's messy mornings, tantrums, ear infections at 2 a.m. It's helping her understand the world even when you're too tired, even when you're broken yourself." "I want all of it," he said without hesitation. "The beautiful, the broken, the sleepless, all of it." Rachel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then there's something I want you to do, not as a test, as a beginning." He nodded. "Anything. Write her a letter," she said. "Something she can read when she's older. Something that explains all of this, not from a courtroom, not from stories passed down, but in your words, your truth. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. Over the next few days, he poured everything into that letter. He wrote about meeting Rachel, about falling in love, about fear and pride and shame. He wrote about Arieth, the daughter he never knew existed until that night outside the pharmacy. He wrote not to impress, but to reveal his regrets, his hopes, his promise. He gave the letter to Rachel in an envelope sealed with his initials. I won't read it, she said. It's hers. And then, something no one expected happened. Daniel invited him to dinner. The table was awkward at first. Arya was in a booster seat between the two men. Rachel passed plates. Daniel asked about the weather. Ethan complimented the chicken. Then, halfway through, Arya dropped her spoon, pointed at Ethan, and said clearly, my baba. They all froze. Then Rachel laughed. Not out of nerves, but genuine, heart-deep amusement. She thinks your name is Bubbles, she said, smiling. Ethan chuckled, and so did Daniel. Just like that, something broke open. They laughed. They ate. They talked not just about Arya, but about life. Daniel, it turned out, had once built his own startup. Ethan shared a story about his first failed pitch. Rachel joined in, shaking her head at both of them, and Arya, in her mismatched socks and bubble-patterned pajamas, clapped for no reason at all. Weeks passed. Then months. The arrangement wasn't perfect. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, but there was effort. Real, honest effort. They attended her doctor appointments together. They created a rotating schedule for preschool pickups. Ethan built her a bookshelf for her room. Daniel fixed the closet door. Rachel taught her how to say please. And eventually, Arya learned Ethan's name. Not Bubbles, not Sir, but Ethan. And one evening, as she sat on his lap and flipped through the photo album he had made months earlier, she pointed to a picture of Rachel, Daniel, and Ethan standing beside her and said, my family. He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. That's right, baby. That's your family. Because in the end, the story wasn't about who had been there first, or who had the title. It was about who stayed, who loved, who showed up even when it hurt. Ethan had lost time, but he hadn't lost the chance. And sometimes, in the mess of life, that's all we need, one chance, and the courage to stay.